Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining this session. And you can see my mother behind. She'll quickly get on the screen. uh, so we shall start our satsang with 3 chants of Om, and then followed by an invocation prayer. Please do repeat after me. I have a request. When you are chanting Om and the invocation prayer, please be in Jnana Mudra. Jnana Mudra is essentially, where you have the tips of your forefinger and your thumb touching each other like this. You have it like this, and the other 3 fingers extended but relaxed. If you can be in that Jnana Mudra, I'll appreciate it. I will explain the reason why I'm asking you to do this at the end of today's satsang. So we will start with 3 chants of Om, which we can do together, and then the invocation prayer, you can follow me. So we'll take a deep breath and do 3 chants of Om now. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavatiitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So you will all notice that we began with chanting of Om, and even when we began our invocation prayer, we started with Om. Om is a single syllabus name for God. That is the simplest way to describe Om. There are lots of other ways that as we go through the Bhagavad Gita, we will come across. But Om is a single syllabus name for God. When we take the name of anything, we think of that particular object. For example, if I say elephant now, even though I'm pretty sure none of you had been thinking about an elephant, now in your mind, there would be an elephant. Or if I say a television, in your mind, you will think of a television. Similarly, we human beings have given this name Om to God. And the purpose for that is that when we chant Om or when we utter Om, we invoke, we think of God, and that Lord presents himself or herself in our mind. And that is the purpose of chanting Om. The meaning of the invocation prayer that we just recited, that means that may the Supreme Lord, we start with Om, of course, and then Sahana Vavatu, may the Supreme Lord protect us. Sahana Bhunaktu, may we all be nourished and energized. Sahaviryam Karavavai, together with this energy, may we use our hands and our minds to bring to work and work together with great energy. Tejasvina Aditamastu ma vidvishavahai. May our study be illuminating and may there be no animosity amongst us. And finally, Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Let there be peace in me. Let there be peace in the forces that are acting on me. And let there be peace in the environment. That is the meaning of the invocation prayer that we just recited. Now, we are all very familiar with invoking. We all understand what invoking is. It's essentially a call on, it is a prayer, and it is mostly done for inspiration. And it is mostly done when we seek for something to be fulfilled. But the beauty of invocation is that when we invoke, something happens within us. There is some occurrence within us. And essentially, that something that happens within us is that we become fine-tuned. And I'll take an example to explain what I mean. If you've tuned a radio, not just a radio device where you listen to music and all that, but if you've tuned a radio device with which people talk to each other, like a walkie-talkie, you have the people who are conversing with each other have to be in the same frequency channel, the same channel or same frequency. And to get to the same frequency, we tune to a particular frequency or the channel. And as we get closer to the frequency, we get much more fine-tuned with the frequency where we need to be. And when this fine-tuning happens, the disturbances that are there otherwise, the static, the noise, and all those kind of things, they go away, and there is complete clarity. When we recite the invocation prayer, we are doing something very similar. We are removing all other disturbances. We are getting our mind to focus on the prayer and what we have set out to do. And we are fine-tuning ourselves with what we are supposed to do and with God. There are two aspects to this quote-unquote fine-tuning. The first aspect is love, and the second aspect is respect. And when love and respect come together, then there is devotion. Love is a feeling of the heart, and respect is a feeling of the brain. And when we tune our hearts with love to the Lord, to God, that in Sanskrit is termed as mat chittaha. M-A-T mat, C-H-I-T-T-A-H-A. Now I will be taking some Sanskrit words as I will be mentioning or talking about some Sanskrit terms or words as we go about. And my request to you would be to note these down along with the meaning. I'll obviously, say the meaning to these words also, along with the other notes that you would be taking. In fact, my recommendation would be if you can keep a separate book or a sheet or a page and create a Sanskrit English dictionary. So against each word, you can have your own dictionary meaning of that word. So mat chittaha is tuning our heart in love to the Lord. And when the brain is tuned to God in respect, it is termed as mat paraha. M-A-T mat, P-A-R-A-H-A, mat paraha. So my request to all of us here, let us all invoke the Lord's blessings with love and with respect, so that we have a very successful, very invigorating Bhagavad Gita Satsang, which is starting today, but we hope to continue till we finish all the 18 chapters. So let us pray to the Lord to make this successful. Thank you. And we really hope that this is going to happen. These are tough times. We were initially, when we first spoke about this, we were all planning to meet in one place. But now because of the situation, we are doing this online, and we hope that the situation improves to the extent that we continue this in person too. Before that, I'm indeed blessed to be a student of the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's brought immense amount of context into my life. I wish I had started this off much earlier in my life, but I'm glad that I started it when I did. I would like to thank Chinmaya Mission, because that is the institution from where I'm learning the Bhagavad Gita. Swami Chinmayananda was the founder of Chinmaya Mission. I've never studied under him, but a lot of the text that we read has been written by him. My teacher, Swami Advayananda Ji, under whom I have gone through a Vedanta course and also a Master Gita, Master Life course. So I'm very thankful to all the institutions and these great saints. Thank you all, to all of you, for giving me this opportunity. I mean, this is immense. I truly, I'm actually indebted to you, because this opportunity is something by which I'm sharing what I've learned. Nothing more than that. I'm just simply sharing. I'm just speaking out what I've learned, and all of us together are learning even more. So my heartfelt gratitude to all of you. And this opportunity, as I say, is basically something where we will study, I would say, the most sacred, the most practical, the most relevant, in spite of whichever time, it was first taught, and whichever time we are doing it now, still most relevant, and actually up to the brim with wisdom. But can we call it a text? Can we call it a treatise? What can we call it? Nothing really. We can't call it all of that. And the best term that I can think for the Bhagavad Gita is nothing but an eternally divine song that is the essence of wisdom. I would actually like you to write this down, please. Bhagavad Gita is an eternally divine song that is the essence of wisdom. So the initial, this session, so this particular satsang, maybe another one or two, may appear to be a lecture. I think in all probability it will be only this one, since one, we are not going through verse by verse and translating those and trying to read them. We are not doing that. It is more of an introduction to Vedanta. And two, also partly because this is over a video and it is not live, it's much more interactive and real when it is live, but that is okay. So please do bear with me if it seems like a lecture. I promise you that we will soon get over that feeling. But it is very important that we do this, because it is important to set this context of Vedanta before we dive into the study of Bhagavad Gita. So with that, I will begin with some of the context that we need to set up from a Vedanta perspective. So we call our gathering, our sessions, Satsanga. Satsanga means nothing but Sat is noble. Please do note it down in your dictionary. And Sangha is company, noble company or good company. However, in the modern context, I would like to call it a gathering of like-minded people. People who have a similar thought process, people who have similar aspirations and goals, like us, who want to learn the Bhagavad Gita. That is a similar thought process, and we aspire for that. But it is valid in any facet of our life. For example, if we want to learn yoga, I would obviously want to go to a teacher who can teach me yoga. If I want to read the Bhagavad Gita, I would really like to go to someone who has read the Bhagavad Gita earlier. If I want to play tennis, I would like to go to a person who would play tennis with me and maybe even slightly better than me, so that my game keeps improving, right? And that is essentially company that is good for us, beneficial for the task that we have set out to do. On the contrary, if I go to play tennis with someone who doesn't know how to play tennis but is maybe a cricket player, then obviously my tennis game is not going to improve at all. And that is actually, quote unquote, we'll end up doing something that we never wanted to do in the first place. So it is in that sense unwanted company. So being in a satsanga removes also, in addition to giving the benefit, it also removes the opportunities, or removes the chances of doing something which we never wanted to in the first place. And it also removes us the risk of getting into delusion, where we will start believing something that is not true. And all this then helps in removing agitation. And when we remove agitation, it leads to a much more calmer mind, a calm mind, and a harnessed intellect. And a calm mind and harnessed intellect are prerequisites for intellectual growth, for any kind of growth, for inner growth. And thereby, satsanga enables inner growth for each one of us. Physical growth is limited. You can't become 12 feet tall. Maybe there is one odd human being out there, but most of us cannot. But then inner growth is indeed limitless. And satsanga helps us set higher goals and grow as much as we all possibly can together. In fact, more the number of people, the better the synergy in growth. So thank you all for being part of this satsanga again. Let's talk about the human being. and it is a human pursuit. And let us talk a little bit about the human being. But before that, one of the common things about that Vedanta tells us about all creatures, about all living species, there are some fundamental common elements that all of them have. The first one is that they all need food or ahara. Ahara in Sanskrit is food. All living species also need either sleep or rest or both, and that is nidra, N-I-D-R-A, nidra. All living species have a sense of fear or bhayam, and they all propagate, which is maithunam, M-A-I-T-H-U-N-A-M, maithunam. And almost all living creatures have three elements that they come into this planet with. These are the body, the mind, and the intellect. And these is also common amongst all living creatures. The body essentially performs the function of perceiving the objects around us. When I am the subject, my body, with the help of sense organs, perceives whatever is outside of me, which is the object world. The mind feels emotions, and the intellect thinks the thoughts that we think. Now, all of us, and especially those of us who have gone through some kind of a science or a manufacturing course, we would have heard of the IPO model, IPO, input, process, output model. Now, this body, mind, intellect is nothing but the input, process, output model for the human being. With our sense organs, which are part of the body, our eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the skin, we perceive whatever is outside of us. And then with our organs of action, which are essentially hands, our legs, our vocal cords, which I am using extensively now, the reproductive system, and the excretory system. These are our organs of action. With these, we perpetuate back into the environment from where we perceive. But before we go to the output or what we perpetuate, the process happens within our mind and our intellect. So whatever we perceive from outside of us goes into our mind, and that part of our mind is called the objective mind, which is linked to the object that we perceive. It just takes in, it just seeps in whatever is perceived by our sense organs. And then it passes it on to the intellect. And the intellect consists of two primary aspects. The one is desires, whatever we desire in life, and the other is our ego. And whatever we perceive and the objective mind takes to the intellect passes through in the process part of the exercise of the model, through the intellect, through our desires and ego, and then goes back into our mind, which is then the subjective mind. And then this subjective mind instructs the body to act and perpetuate outside through the organs of action. Now, this entire model or this entire input, process, output that I just described, while this is happening throughout our lives, this is what is going on. And while this is happening, it is also creating some inherent tendencies in us. We all understand these inherent tendencies sometimes as feeling, sometimes as intuition, but these are tendencies that are inbuilt in us. It is also said that we come into this world through some of these tendencies. Science describes it as a genetic code, but fundamentally these are tendencies that are inherent within us, which are built through this process that goes on either as part of this life or as part of a previous life, or when we were all in our mother's womb. These inherent tendencies are called vasanas. I will spell it out for you. V-A-A-S-A-A-N-A-S. Vasanas are inherent tendencies that then influence the way we behave in the world. Now, if we take ourselves to be only the body, the mind, and the intellect, then there is a problem. Even though the body, the mind, and the intellect are extremely powerful elements with which we have come into this world and which has helped us achieve so much in our lives, individually, in families, in organizations, in the world outside. But if we get encapsulated, if we get within the capsule of our body, mind, and intellect paradigm, we suffer from the limitations of our physical body, which is essentially, much weaker than most other living beings in the planet. We suffer from the vagaries of our so-called monkey mind, and we suffer from the assumptions and the dictations of our intellect. Now, the body is essentially part of our physical personality. The sense organs and the organs of action. When a human being seeks to get satiated, seeks to get satisfied by the sense organs and organs of action, the dominant personality of that human being is the physical personality. When a person is highly emotional and fluctuates between very happy and sad feelings, that person is essentially dependent on the mind or the emotions. And the emotional personality of the human being dominates. And when a person is extremely logic-oriented, very judgmental, very inquisitive, then the person is an intellectual personality, because the logic and curiosity stems from the intellect of a person. And if we are very dependent on the three elements, that is the body, mind, and intellect, we get encapsulated within this. We suffer from the limitations of the body, the vagaries of the mind, and the assumptions and dictations of the intellect. When this happens, the fundamental thing that initially happens when we are in this capsule and operate out of this capsule is that we are ignorant. And what are we ignorant to? We are very simply ignorant to all other body, mind, intellect paradigms that are out there. So if I am capsuled within my paradigm of body, mind, and intellect, I'm ignorant about each of your paradigms. I'm ignorant about the collective paradigm of this group or of the society at large. And that ignorance is called agyana. And that is the fundamental ignorance of the human being. Agyana, A-G-Y-A-N-A, means ignorance. And that ignorance further leads to us operating from our own perspective. When this perspective goes to an extreme, we call it my way or the highway. We know that term, right? And that comes because we operate from the sense of I and the sense of my. What is I and what is my? And that in Sanskrit is termed as aham. Aham is I and mama is mine. When this keeps continuing, because we are operating in that framework of ignorance or agyana, because we are operating from our own perspective, which is aham and mama, then we do not get fulfilled, simply because this is a very limited perspective. The world is much bigger than just this simple perspective. And because we don't get fulfilled, we get a sense of sorrow. And that sense of sorrow is called shoka. S-H-O-K-A, shoka. If this further continues, it leads to a sense of delusion, because after a period of time, we start believing or we start having misconceptions or mistaken beliefs about what we think, where we are, what our opinion is, and so on and so forth. And that moha or that delusion is called moha. If this keeps continuing, if we continue to remain in this individual body, mind, intellect paradigm, then we are not able to operate in the world in an efficient manner or in an effective manner. Both our efficiency and effectiveness take a beating. And if that goes to an extreme, then we end up dereliction of duty. We do not do our duties properly. And that in Sanskrit is termed as Swadharma Nasha. And all this is very important, because we will know when we do chapter 1 in Bhagavad Gita, we will find that Arjuna was in this state where he was absolutely derelicting his duties. He was not doing his duties at all, because he started in the framework of ignorance, went into this situation of I and my, which led to sorrow, which led to delusion, and prevented him from doing his duty. And that is what essentially happens to most of us, or maybe even all of us, most of the time. This vicious loop is the samsara that we live in. And the entire Bhagavad Gita and the learnings that we are going to go through is a solution to this, to how do we get out of this vicious loop. Now, even though when we get capsuled within our body, mind, and intellect paradigm, we have these problems, we also have to recognize that essentially this body, mind, intellect, the faculties that have been given to us, not only are very, especially the emotion, the mind, and the intellect, not only are they unique to us, but they are very powerful capabilities that help us rule over every other living being, as we have seen. And I have the faith and belief that even though coronavirus is there, threatening that this will just, overtake humanity, I think ultimately humanity will come through. But I only hope will come through in a much more sane manner than we were in the recent past. Now, this capability, this aspect of our emotion and our intellect, that gives us this huge capability to set and pursue goals. And human goals are what sets us apart from any other creature. For example, most of us, today have some kind of a pet. And let me take the most common pet, which is a dog. Let us say that I take my dog for a dog show. And in the dog show, my dog wins the dog show. It's me who has taken my dog to the dog show. My dog's name is Simba. And I take Simba to a dog show and Simba wins. I'm the one who had the desire to take Simba to the dog show. I'm the one who looked forward to Simba winning. And once Simba has won and they have this podium like they have in Olympics, and Simba is majestically standing on position number 1, wagging his tail and barking as he always does, he doesn't know what's going on, or he has maybe some idea of what's going on. But that goal was the human being's goal. And this capability and this uniqueness of the two faculties, which are much more enhanced for the human being, give us the capability to set goals, pursue goals, and achieve those goals. These human goals in Sanskrit are termed as Purushartha. Purush, P-U-R-U-S-H, means human, and Artha, A-R-T-H-A, means goals. And Purusharthas are of 3 types. The first one is Artha Purushartha. Artha, A-R-T-H-A. Artha Purushartha are necessary for survival. These are human goals that we make so that we survive. And once we know that we are surviving, we are able to generate some amount of wealth that allows us to live comfortably. Food, clothing, shelter, maybe a car, a refrigerator, maybe something bigger, a house, and so on and so forth. These things ensure that we survive and also insure us in case there are some problems. Essentially, Artha Purushartha helps us with removing any scope of sadness. In Sanskrit, this is termed as Dukkha Nivritti. Dukkha, D-U-K-H-A, is sadness. Nivritti in this context is removal. N-I-V-R-I-T-H-I. The second type of human goal or Purushartha is Kama Purushartha. Kama Purushartha is essentially for entertainment. Once we have the Artha or the primary goal satisfied, then we look for entertainment. And entertainment could be a movie, it could be socializing, it could be any other kind of entertainment that we are all familiar with. And the third type of human goal is Dharma Purushartha. Dharma Purushartha means goodwill. In Sanskrit, goodwill is termed as Punyam. Punya. Now, all of us want some goodwill. We want to be known as good human beings. We want other people to appreciate us. And that is Dharma Purushartha. Now, Kama Purushartha and Dharma Purushartha together lead to acquisition of happiness or Sukha Praptihi. Sukha is S-U-K-H-A. Praptihi is acquisition. P-R-A-P-T-A-I-H-I. So while Artha Purushartha gives us Dukkha Nivritti or removal of sadness, Kama and Dharma Purusharthas give us Sukha Prapti or acquisition of happiness. Now I'm sure most of you will be familiar with Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs. Otherwise, please do look it up. And, he talks about something very similar where he says that a human being starts at fulfilling. These are basically the needs of human beings that get fulfilled in a hierarchical manner, beginning with psychological and then safety needs, a need of belonging and love, need of esteem, and finally self-actualization. So this is very similar to what is said in Vedanta. In fact, in all probability, Maslow got some of these ideas from Vedanta. However, these goals have their own limitations too. And these limitations happen when things don't go the way that it was set out to or it was meant to. And these limitations are pain, dissatisfaction, and dependence. Pain if what we wanted does not happen, what we set out to achieve does not happen. Dissatisfaction also the same. Dependence because we are again and again going back and working so that we are able to get what we want. Now, these goals, the Artha, Kama, Dharma, Purushartha, they are seemingly different for all human beings. And we all pursue these in our own different ways. But ultimately, through each of these different ways, we are all seeking that one thing. And that one thing is happiness. I'm sure we will all agree that that one thing is happiness is what all of us seek. And when we say happiness, which is a universal calling, which is a natural pursuit of each one of us, what is this happiness that we are seeking? And please note that this happiness that we are seeking is very different from joy, because joy essentially is short-lived. It comes and goes. So the happiness that we are seeking is something that is going to last longer, much longer. Like a person, if two of us are having an ice cream and I gobble up my ice cream and then you are continuing to eat it, I'll be looking at you because my joy is done for. It's done. I've had it, fulfilled it, and it's no longer there. And I'll be looking at your ice cream saying, hey, you are enjoying it longer than me. So each one of us are looking to seek happiness, which one lasts for long, and if possible, eternally, throughout future as much as possible. And happiness that touches our core of our being, which goes deep into us. We are happy from deep inside. And this happiness is complete happiness or full happiness. And in Sanskrit, this is termed as Purna Ananda. Purna, P-O-O-R-N-A, Ananda. Everlasting, long, everlasting, deep core happiness is Purna Ananda. And this is the Parama Purushartha of human beings. Parama means ultimate. Purushartha, we have said already, is goal. Parama Purushartha is Purna Ananda. I'm just going to deviate a little bit to give you a mathematical expression of this Parama Purushartha. If you take H as happiness, I would like to say that H equals DF, which is the number of desires fulfilled divided by the number of desires entertained. If you could just write down this formula in your sheet, D is equal to DF divided by DE. DF is the number of desires fulfilled and DE is the number of desires entertained. Now, we all know that greater the numerator, greater the function. So in this case, more the number of desires fulfilled, the happier we will be. And we all know that lower the denominator, higher the function. So we all know that lesser the number of desires entertained, more happy we are. And in fact, if we take the denominator to 0, the function is equal to infinity. So if we can actually take our desires entertained to 0, we will have infinite happiness or Purna Ananda. Well, how do we take desires to 0 is something impossible. So we'll dwell on it when the time comes. So how do we attain this Purna Ananda? And a lot of it is what we will study going forward. But most of us, most human beings follow the path of the pleasant, something that gives us joy, the glitter. And that we realize doesn't give us the ultimate happiness. A lot of the troubles that we are going through now because of this coronavirus infection is essentially because we have followed the path of the pleasant, ignoring the long-term, loss or long-term deficiency that we are causing to our own existence and our own environment. And that is giving us certain troubles now. Now, the path of the pleasant is always temporary. It's an ephemeral feature. It does not last long. And as it is ephemeral, it essentially is a resolution. It does not give solution to long-standing problems. These are like band-aid solutions. So if I have a cut, it may need a stitch, but I may put a band-aid to just prevent the bleeding from happening. But that's not a solution. It's just a temporary aid that I've given myself till I go to the doctor or till I go to the hospital and get myself stitched. Similarly, whether it is malaria or whether it is coronavirus infection, we may take a paracetamol, and that paracetamol will help reduce the fever. It will help us feel better, but it is not going to take away the malaria or the coronavirus. It's not going to remove it. It will just give a temporary relief. Like we have heard about relief camps, when there is a flood or when there is some kind of a natural disaster, there are relief camps. People lose their homes. The relief camps gives them temporary relief, but ultimately they have to go and build their homes all over again. So a relief is never a solution. Now, the pursuit of finding temporary resolution to long-standing problems is called prayas in Sanskrit. Preyas, prayas. Prayas is all the pursuit that we do, which is nothing but ephemeral, nothing but path of the pleasant. This will get lost in time and we will get back to square one. The pursuit of finding something which is everlasting, which is permanent in Sanskrit, that pursuit is called Shreyas. S-H-R-E-Y-A-S, Shreyas. So now let us suppose that we get permanent happiness, which is deep, which hits our core, and which is also long-term. Suppose we actually get it. Will it be with us forever? Will it be actually eternal? The chances are no, not really, because we all know that anything that begins at a point in time will end in some other point in time, right? So the Vedas tell us that getting or gaining permanent happiness will not happen. So I will repeat this. The Vedas tell us that getting or gaining permanent happiness, that is among the first knowledge that the Vedas give us. Do not try, do not go on the path where you are trying to get or gain permanent happiness. Some of the engineers most of us are from engineering organizations, and most engineers seek these documents, these process documents, which will tell them exactly what to do, how they should write the code, how they should define the requirements, and so on and so forth. That never happens because it's an evolving situation. Initially when, software code was written for the first time, it was written in different languages, BASIC and so on and so forth. Now the language has changed. So the way they write has changed. So it keeps changing. The kind of solutions we are finding to software resolutions is keeping on changing. So it is not possible to give this document that engineers are seeking. Similarly, it is not possible to get this permanent happiness that we are seeking. In the Upanishad, this is termed, and I think it is the Mundaka Upanishad, it is termed as Nasti Akrutaha Kritena. Nasti is na asti. Na, na, is not. Asti, A-S-T-I, there, not there. Akritaha, A-K-R-U-T-A-H-A. Akritaha means that which is permanent. Kritena, K-R-I-T-E-N-A, by action or by effort. Nasti Akritaha Kritena means that which is permanent by action or effort is not there. Thus, the Vedas basically tell us that the method of doing anything with the aim or the goal or the purushartha of getting permanent happiness is wrong. Now let us talk a little bit about the Vedas. The Vedas come from the root vid, V-I-D, vid. Vid means to know. And Vedas are a means of knowledge. Means of knowledge means pramana, P-R-A-M-A-N-A. Pramana is means of knowledge. And knowledge of what? The Vedas, among a lot of other things, they give us the knowledge or the solution to this ultimate goal of Purna Ananda or full, complete happiness. And the portion of the Vedas that deal with this is called Vedanta. V-E-D-A-N-T-A, Vedanta. And the solution that Vedanta gives us is Shreyas. I talked about it earlier, Shreyas. The Vedas have 3 sections. And in Sanskrit, this is referred to as the Kandatrayam. Kanda, K-A-N-D-A means sections. Trayam, T-R-A-Y-A-M means 3. The 3 sections of the Vedas or the Kandas are, the first one is Karma Kanda, the second one is Upasana Kanda, and the third one is Jnana Kanda. Karma Kanda is action oriented, Upasana Kanda is devotion oriented, and Jnana Kanda is knowledge oriented. While the Karma Kanda is preparatory in nature, we need to, anything that we pursue in life, we need to prepare. We need to strategize. We need to plan through. The Karma Kanda helps us plan through. It helps us strategize. So it is preparatory in nature. The Upasana Kanda and the Jnana Kandas are solutionary in nature. They provide the solution. What solution? The solution to our goal of Purna Ananda. And when we have the Jnana Kanda, essentially gives us the knowledge or of the self or the true nature of us as human beings. And when we operate or when we do karma, when we act with a better knowledge of our own self, that leads to better action and action that is based on true context. Similarly, the Upasana Kanda helps us take action in a devoted manner. Any action that we take, and later on we will read that action with devotion is nothing but karma yoga. Only action is karma. Action, devoted action, action with devotion is karma yoga. And that action which is devoted to a greater cause, that helps us achieve that mind, focus of the mind to get what we want to get. For example, I mean, today I've started off with the tennis example, so I'll stick to that. I mean, we all know Roger Federer as a great champion. And if he were to focus on just a point, and if he loses the point and gets disappointed, dejected because he lost the point, then that dejection is going to lead to him losing the other point, next point, and probably the game, and maybe the set, and then maybe the match itself. But we have seen Roger Federer, whenever he even loses the tournament, you will find that he is gracefulness personified. He loses with grace. He loses with grace because he is not worried about that particular match or that particular tournament. He's looking at tennis as the bigger goal, and he wants to play great tennis. And when you have that bigger goal and you want to play that game in the best possible manner, then losing a point or a match or a tournament does not really matter. And that brings that grace into that performance, into that action, into that karma. And that comes from knowledge and devotion. And when we have these 3 elements, that results in purity of the mind. And purity of the mind is termed as Chitta Shuddhi. Chitta is mind, Shuddhi is purity. C-H-I-T-T-A, Chitta, S-H-U-D-D-H-I, Shuddhi is purity. And it further also leads to Chitta Ekagrata. Chitta Ekagrata means single pointedness of the mind, where you're focused on one point. And please note, I'm not using the word focused mind. I'm talking about single pointedness of the mind. Chitta is mind again. Ekagrata. Ekaghra. Eka is one, agra is pointed, ekagratha, agratha is pointedness. And one of the examples that I love to quote when talking about Chitta Ekagrata and Chitta Shuddhi is, this, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Tirumalai Tirupati Balaji Darshan, where we go to the Tirupati temple in Andhra Pradesh. And there you are pushed through, there's no time, there's hardly any time. And we are like in a cattle herd. There is a herd of human beings that is being pushed through. And the priest there keeps saying, Jargandi, 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 and they keep pushing you through. But when you come out, there is this sense of peace. There is this sense of achievement. There is this huge sense of elevation in us. And even though we hardly spent a second in front of the Lord, we feel tremendous. We feel absolutely blissful. And that happens because in that 1 second that we spent in front of the Lord, we were able to get Chitta Shuddhi and Chitta Ekagrata. And that is what gives us the capability of having that elevated feeling. And this elevated feeling, that essentially gives us freedom. Freedom for what? Freedom to enjoy what is available. Even though we got herded through in front of God, even though that happened, we still enjoyed it. And freedom to not regret what is not available. And what is this? This freedom to enjoy what is available and freedom to not regret what is not available. This is nothing. We talked about Purushartha, which is the human goal. And we talked about 3 types of human goals, which is Artha Purushartha, Kama Purushartha, and Dharma Purushartha. Freedom from these human goals is what we get. Thus, the Vedas teach us that this happiness that we are always searching for, that we are trying to get from somewhere imaginary outside, even if we get it, we will lose it. This happiness is within us. We need to discover it. It is our true nature. We need to unveil that true nature. That divinity is within us. We need to unveil that divinity. That is what the Vedas teach us. And when we do that, we see the light within. And when you have the light within, and when you keep seeing the light within more and more, it becomes brighter than the light which is in your surrounding. And that, when you see some of these saints with these halo effect, the halo behind them, that just signifies that the light within them is brighter than the light that is surrounding them. Thus, we see that the Vedas are both preparatory and solutionary in nature. It helps us prepare through karma, and it gives a solution to finding this permanent, long-standing happiness through jnana and upasana. And finally, it tells us that you are what you are searching for. Please look within and you will find it. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the benefits of this finding our true nature. So just to deviate a little bit, what are the benefits of spirituality? We are talking about spirituality. I want to contrast the spirituality with, what we see, what we do on our day-to-day basis. We have made tremendous progress in our life. This has come through our scientific pursuits, our pursuits in the field of art, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, there is increasing discontent. At the same time, we have seen, these problems like this coronavirus and so on and so forth. So while the scientists study the world outside, the spiritual people, or the spiritualist, if I may use that term, study the self inside. So the scientist probe into the object world, and the spiritualist probe into the subject world. And I think each human being, each and every human being must become a spiritualist. Whether we become a scientist or not, we must become a spiritualist and probe the subject world, probe ourselves, so that we are able to discover our own true nature. And this kind of a person, if we do that, and if we do that repeatedly, we will be able to be like a lighthouse in the ocean of life. Now, this true nature is called Tattva Bodha in Sanskrit. Tattva is true, Bodha is knowledge. Tattva Bodha. What are the advantages as per Vedanta of Tattva Bodha? The first advantage or the first benefit is Jigyasa Nivritti. Jigyasa Nivritti. Jigyasa, Jigyasa Nivritti, Nivrithi. Jigyasa means curiosity and Nivritti is freedom. So this knowledge of our own true nature gives us the freedom from basic curiosity. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is going to happen tomorrow? And so on and so forth. Fundamentally, human beings are very curious. And by the way, we have discovered and invented so many things because of that curiosity. So it's good to be curious. But at the same time, we are also rubberneck. For those of you who have seen this film Mask, Jim Carrey, you know, his neck kind of rotates all around. We may not be able to do that physically, but that's what we have. You know, the curiosity, the mind, it rotates all around. Exactly like imagine your head could rotate all around. That's how our mind rotates all around. We are so curious, even where we should not be. We get freedom from that kind of curiosity. The second benefit of Tattva Bodha or this self-knowledge is Vidyananda Prapti. Vidya Ananda. Vidya means knowledge. Ananda is happiness. Prapti is attainment. Vidya, Ananda, Prapthi. The happiness that we attain through awareness or through knowledge. That is Vidyananda Prapti. This leads to satisfaction and contentment. Not only does this lead to satisfaction and contentment, it also gives us some kind of a uninterrupted supply. Like we have the UPS, you know, if the main power goes down, we have the DG set or the UPS system, which is nothing but the uninterrupted power supply. Similarly, this Tattva Bodha or self-knowledge gives us uninterrupted Ananda supply. We can call it UAS. So the second benefit is Vidyananda Prapti. The third benefit is Karpanya Nivritti. Karpanya, Karpanya. Karpanya is dependence. Nivritti, like I said earlier, is freedom. Freedom from desperate dependence on the world. Now, what is outside in the world is either experiential, like for example, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. You know, what I experience is what I know and what I acknowledge. Or it is time bound, like we discussed earlier. For example, I may like my glass of coffee, cup of coffee or glass of wine. I may enjoy the first glass, I may enjoy the second glass, I may even enjoy the sixth glass. But if you ask me to have the 15th or the 20th glass of wine, after some time I'll be ready to spit it out and I'll actually hate it. So it is time bound. And finally, it is unpredictable. You know, we all used to take our walks. Most of us live in Palm Meadows. We used to take that for granted. You know, we used to think that walking in Palm Meadows is something that is given in our life. You know, but today we are not able to go out and take a walk. It's unpredictable. So this dependence on this outside world is either experiential, time-bound, or dependable. And Karpanya Nivritti is nothing but freedom from such dependence. The fourth benefit is Agatha Nivritti. Aghata, Agatha Nivritti. Agatha is nothing but adverse situations, like the situation we are facing now. Agatha Nivritti provides us cushion for adverse situation that could even get traumatic. Like now today, because of Corona, a lot of places there is a lot of trauma. Thankfully, in India, we have not yet got to that stage, and hopefully we will not. But this teaches us how to cope. It is like a shock absorber. It is like this insurance policy that we take. And this helps us where nothing can be helped. When the situation cannot be helped, but has to be managed, the knowledge of our true self gives us that capability to be free of this adverse situation. Even when the situation is unremediable, for example, if someone who we love passes away, that situation is unremediable and it tells us how to cope. It teaches us how to cope. Like it is in Sanskrit, this is termed as aparihara. A-P-A-Aparihara, Aparihara. The fifth benefit of self-knowledge or Tattva Bodha is Dakshata Prapti. Dakshata is balance, Prapti is attainment. And essentially, it is being balanced in our approach, in our conduct, in the way we are. Attainment of a balanced, well-balanced mind and intellect. And a well-balanced mind and intellect gives us poise. And we will read in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2 how important this poise is. This balance amongst when we deal with extremities is extremely important. And we are all familiar with two of our big faculties, which are emotional quotient and the intelligence quotient. And Dakshata or poise or balance helps us manage these two quotients extremely well. Both of them are equally important and both need to be available. But this poise or that primarily comes from emotion is extremely critical, because if EQ is available, IQ can be obtained. You can go and read up and get it. But if EQ is not available, even the IQ that we may already possess cannot be used. So it is extremely important to have this poise. So this self-knowledge, to get this Tattva Bodha, this requires as much probing, as much as probing into the external world, whether it is space, whether it is into the coronavirus, there is a tremendous amount of probing that is going on into this virus to find a cure for it. We had Chandrayaan, we had this Mars explorer that went to the space. As much of that probing that happens, we need to launch an internal probe within us to find this Tattva Bodha. And the probe that we will be launching into us, we will be doing this with the help of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And the study of Bhagavad Gita is going to help us launch this internal probe. So the message, the ultimate message of Bhagavad Gita is, number one, be free of sorrow and delusion. That comes from Ajnana, that comes from I and my. Perform the right action. Purify your mind. Get your mind to be single-pointed and pave the path to liberation. This is the ultimate message of the Bhagavad Gita, which we will see in the next few weeks, and so on. The Bhagavad Gita also has 3 sections, exactly like the Vedas, the Kandatrayam. The section 1 of Bhagavad Gita is from chapter 1 to chapter 6. Chapter 1 to chapter 6, along with describing karma, it also gives clarity into the nature of the self or the Atman. Self is termed as Atman, A-T-M-A-N. And this is referred to as Atma Swarupa. Swarupa, S-W-A-R-U-P-A, is nature. Atma is self. So the first 6 chapters, which is section 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, gives us Atma Swarupa. Section 2 is chapter 7 to 12. And that, in addition to giving details on Upasana or devotion, gives clarity on the nature of God or Ishvara. That is termed as Ishvara Swarupa or Bhagavad Swarupa. Ishvara Swarupa or Bhagavad Swarupa. And section 3, which is from chapters 13 to 18, in addition to giving details on Jnana, it gives clarity on the nature of Advaita, A-D-V-A-I-T-A, or non-duality. Advaita means non-duality. And it is termed as Aikya Swarupa, A-I-K-Y-A. Aikya means oneness, non-dual. Swarupa, of course, is nature. Aikya Swarupa. So the first section helps us learn about the self or Atma Swarupa. The second section helps us learn about the nature of the God or Ishvara Swarupa. And the final section helps us learn about the nature of non-duality, Advaita, which is Aikya Swarupa. So I would like to say that the Bhagavad Gita brings to us this vast knowledge that comes from the Vedas and from the Upanishads, and in a very simple and uplifting manner. That is the beauty of the Bhagavad Gita. So with that, I come to the end of the introduction. It's 5:05. And we will complete this session with another invocation. But before we do that, I had promised you that I will tell you why we have to be on Jnana Mudra when we do the invocation. The Jnana Mudra is also known as Raja Mudra, or the king of all mudras. Mudra is nothing but a physical symbol. Like we have physical symbols for various things, mudra is a physical symbol. And the Jnana Mudra is the physical symbol of ultimate knowledge. And we just went through what this ultimate knowledge is. Ultimate knowledge is the way through which we get long-lasting, deep happiness. Now, in the Jnana Mudra, the middle finger, the ring finger, and the little finger, all these three fingers, they denote the gross body, which is the matter, the subtle body, which is the mind, and the causal body, which is nothing but the tendencies or vasanas, which then gives direction to the mind. So the three fingers, which is the middle, ring, and little finger, denote the gross body, matter, subtle body, mind, and the causal body or the vasanas. The index finger denotes the individual, and the thumb stands for the consciousness principle. The Jnana Mudra thus indicates that this individual, which is depicted by the index finger, moves away from the gross, the subtle, and the causal, and identifies with the pure consciousness, which is nothing but one's true nature. And by that identification, attains the Paramapurushartha, which is the ultimate goal of the human being. That is the significance of the Jnana Mudra. With that, let us recite the invocation. After that, we can continue to some observations, questions, comments, if you have anything to share. And when we do that, whoever is speaking, please unmute yourself. The others, keep yourself muted. So please repeat after me. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. The meaning of this invocation is: the Brahman is full and complete. The apparent creation is full and complete. From Brahman, this creation has come about. And even though this creation has come about from the Brahman continues to be ever complete. It is like the ocean. Even if we keep removing water from the ocean, it is always filled to the brim. Similarly, even though the creation is flowing out of the Brahman is always ever complete. That is the meaning of this invocation. So thank you very much. We come to the end of our first satsang. Thank you all, and I'm looking forward to continuing and having very great invigorating sessions. So if any of you have something to share, you have questions, please go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of new concepts were, thrown at a very high speed. So we need time to absorb them. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. And that was Deepak. And yes, I did. Initially, I thought maybe we should do this introduction over 2 or 3 sessions. But then in my anxiety to get into the Bhagavad Gita sooner, I did this. And if you think that there is a lot, we can definitely have a revision session. Maybe we are all on WhatsApp. We are all on the group. So if majority of us feel, we can do a revision session, go through this once again at a much slower pace the next Saturday, and then get back to the Bhagavad Gita. Or before that, we will be doing the prayer too.
It takes a while, I mean, to train your mind. I mean, especially when you're lived in this kind of Maya, and it takes a while for you to get focused and focus on spirituality. So I think it's a good idea to get a recap of our 10 minutes and then continue with the next session.
So I would also request you, see, we have scheduled these, the satsang once a week. So please do use the remaining part of the week to read up through your notes, number one. As we get into the Bhagavad Gita, I will also give you specifics in terms of what you need to revise in the book itself. So I hope all of you have got your book. Otherwise, try and get it as soon as possible. I can also do one thing. I've also taken down notes which I'm referring to as I'm speaking to you. I can share these notes with you. So I will maybe ask all of you to, if I can share it over WhatsApp, I'll put it in the group. If not, I will ask you to share your email IDs and I'll share my notes also with you.
Thank you, Srini.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.